Yeah, let's get started. My name is Richard Hicks. This is this month's or this quarter's Always On VPN AMA. Ask me anything, and in this session, we're gonna do a lot of Q&A and hopefully answer all of your questions. But a bit of brief housekeeping here before we get started. This is the October 23 edition. I tried to do this at the end of the quarter. The goal was to try to do it at the end of September. It just got too busy, way too many projects. So I had to push it off a little bit. So we're doing it in October. So it's kind of the start of Q4, if you will. But if you don't know me for some reason, my name is Richard Hicks, founder and principal consultant at Richard M. Hicks Consulting. And you can find me on Twitter at Richard Hicks. I do have a newsletter if you'd like to keep up with me and all things mobility and security and things like that, of the related items. I'd be happy if you subscribed. richardhicks.com/newsletter. I don't send out a ton of posts via email, probably a handful a year, maybe less than half a dozen sometimes. Article updates, if there's something pressing, I'll send that out to you. Sometimes it's promotional stuff. Some of my software vendor partners might have new features or capabilities or new product. Also, training. I'm going to be doing some training classes next year. I'll be putting those out and promoting those on the newsletter as well. And if you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to buy my book. Maybe take a look over at Pluralsight and have a look at some of the content there. I do have an Always On VPN training course there that is nearly 7 hours in length. It is a magnum opus of all things Always On VPN. If you sign up for Pluralsight, you won't be disappointed. You'll have plenty to do there as well. You can learn more there by going to aovpnbook.com. If you want to take a look at the book, there's links to purchase it there. Of course, if you're looking at Pluralsight, just go to richardhicks.com/Pluralsight. That'll take you to my content catalog at Pluralsight, and you can see all of the things, all of the courses that I've produced there. Now, one of the things we've done, by the way, is like the third or fourth AMA that we've done. And I do appreciate everybody joining me because these are fun for me as well, and hopefully informative for you. But one of the things that I like to do is kind of cover off on some upcoming events where I might be speaking and things like that. And honestly, I really don't have much other than I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks. So I don't have any more events planned for the rest of the year, no conferences, no speaking engagements, but I am planning to bug out in the middle of October for a couple of weeks for annual leave. I'm planning to head to Hawaii. So if you're looking for me around the end of October and I don't reply, I'll probably be drinking an ice cold beer on the beach somewhere. Definitely want to get back to some 30, 35 degree temps, 85, 90 for you, those of you in America. But anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing. So I don't have a whole lot. I just thought I'd throw this slide up there for fun. Anyway, I do want to briefly talk about and remind you about Windows Server 2012 R2. We have 1 week. Today's the 3rd. It expires on the 10th. So what that means is that Server 2012 R2 will not receive any more updates going forward. It's pretty much the end of the road. And if you haven't done so already, you are really, really late to the party, but it is time to migrate. The workloads that I can help you with, if you need some assistance, would be things like RAS, NPS, Network Policy Server, ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services. If you're issuing certificates with the Microsoft CA, I can help you. It is not as hard as you think. I mentioned this last session. There are some gotchas there. Please don't try to migrate CAs and change the name. That's a recipe for disaster. It can be done. It's just prohibitively difficult, and there's a lot of there's a lot of ancillary damage that can be done when you take that path. But anyway, I can sort of help you there. Anyway, that being said, we usually move on to issues and open issues, and we talk about those, and we'll certainly ask, I'll ask you, the audience, to chime in with any problems you're having today. But today I don't really have anything that's open. I'm not aware of anything that's really pressing. I wanted to talk today about closed issues, though, and I'm going to say sort of closed. We'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, there was this problem with Windows 11 and Intune. When Windows 11 was first introduced, many customers reported that Always On VPN connections would drop periodically. So customers were users were being disrupted. They'd be working, boom, all of a sudden the VPN would drop. It would certainly come back up most of the time, but this was a real problem. And it was traced back to an issue that was causing the VPN profiles to be basically removed and replaced every time the device synced with Intune. And so Many of you opened support cases with that, and I'm pleased to announce that that was fixed. So it was fixed with the August update. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I don't have that correct, Philip, but I believe it was the August update. And Philip, I believe you said this was affecting the device tunnel only, but I've had many customers report that they were having the problem with the user tunnel, and that's been solved as of the August update. And so if you're running Windows 11 and anything, if you've updated in the last couple of months, you should be okay, unless you have deployed Always On VPN using custom XML. And so what this means is that this fix that came out in August seems to have fixed the problem when you use the Intune native profile, meaning if you select a template and you choose VPN, you choose the VPN template, that seems to work. What doesn't work is if you're using custom XML. Now, I had a customer reach out to me who still has a support case open on this, and he had reported back to me that one of the support engineers indicated it was an issue with the order of the XML. So I did a little bit of testing myself, and I was able to come up with a workaround. Basically, what was happening was when your XML was configured, as you configure your XML, you can pretty much put the elements in any order. They do have to be nested hierarchically correctly. But for example, like if you're using custom cryptography, you can put DFS group first and cipher transform constants last, right? That order of the elements within the tags didn't matter. The nesting does absolutely, but the order within those elements matters critically now. And that was a change in Windows 11. So it would still work. But ultimately, what happens is when Intune pushes the profile out, and basically once it reevaluates the connection to determine if a change was made, and this is the critical point, is if the XML is not ordered correctly, it sees that as a change, right? Like this change. This is not what I was expecting to see. So with Windows 11, it's Intune with custom XML. When you deploy these XML profiles, if they are not ordered precisely, you will still have this issue where the VPN profiles are removed and replaced on each device sync. Now, I've had some success by ordering my XML exactly as Intune expects it. I'll qualify that by saying I've had some success. I seem to get the device tunnel to work quite reliably. I've had a little bit of struggle with the user tunnel, but ultimately, the process that I have done, and by the way, I have an article in the works. It's in the queue. I'm trying to get that finished soon. Unfortunately, I'm just buried in projects right now, but I'll try to get that out as soon as I can. But essentially, what happens is this. What I do is I basically upload my XML, push it out to the endpoint, and then once it's pushed to the endpoint, then I will extract it. I have a tool. It's in my GitHub repository. If you go to github.com/RichardHicks, there's a PowerShell script there called Get VPN Client Profile XML. And this is a troubleshooting tool that I wrote that allows you to basically extract that XML from the VPN profile that Intune pushed, and then you can compare the order. I usually just open it up in Notepad++, install the plugin that allows you to do the compare, and anything that is not exactly in the correct order as it appears in the extracted XML, then I'll just reorder it and change it. Now, I have updated my XML template files. Those are found in my GitHub as well, github.com/RichardHicks. I have a couple of template files there. I've actually updated some of those to reflect this new order. And so what I've had is some success just simply reordering my XML. So today, I have no idea if Microsoft is going to fix this or not. I don't know any customers that have support cases open specifically for this issue. But my recommendation today is probably to use the VPN template, the native VPN template, whenever possible. Now, the qualification is the whenever possible. There are scenarios in which you must use XML because the settings you're trying to change are not available in the Intune UI. Or if you're trying to use, for example, IPv6 within the VPN tunnel, the IPv6 support in the Intune template is broken. If you're trying to use features that are not exposed, if you're trying to use traffic filters or trying to do things like using exclusion routes, none of those are exposed in the VPN template, so you have to use XML. So in those scenarios, you're kind of stuck with using XML. Another big one is the device tunnel. So the device tunnel, I usually use the XML because the option to disable the class-based default route is not exposed in the UI. Some of these things are changing. Microsoft is always updating the Intune template. It does get better over time. I mean, I remember there was a time when the cryptography suite couldn't be adjusted, so you had to use XML, and they added that eventually. So that's nice. So that is making some headway, so that's good news. But at the end of the day, if you are using Windows 11 today and you're deploying using the Intune template, as long as you have the August update, you should be cool. If you are still using XML, you may need to pay some specific attention to that order, and look for that blog post soon. That's all I had today for my kind of canned presentation. I want to open up the floor to questions at this point. Just while we're doing our Q&A, I want to let everybody know, Twitter, I guess it's now X, is my social media platform of choice. You can find me there at Richard Hicks. Encourage you to use the hashtag AOV PN, because that's easy way to make sure that you find other resources, not just myself. But if you have questions, you can hit me up there. And feel free to anytime just drop me a note. I mean, obviously we have the website, directaccess.richardhicks.com. You can there's a contact page there. You can comment on any of the articles, of course. But if you just want to reach out to me directly, share information that maybe you don't want to be public, drop me a note, rich@richardhicks.com. I answer all emails. So unless you're trying to sell me something usually, but I respond to everybody, and you're going to get an out of office beginning October 16th, just a heads up on that. But anyway, that being said, I want to open up the floor, basically let's just kick it off. Let's answer any questions you have. Who wants to go first? Anybody? We got maybe some questions in the chat here. Thank you for posting that link to that script, Doug. Appreciate it. You could be my honorary presenter here, but thank you for that. So questions at all, anyone? It's got to be somebody.
This is Lisa. I had one. I see Martin join real quick, and I'll let him know. One question I had, you mentioned the CA. We actually did have to build a new CA infrastructure because they don't support the old design anymore, which is basically 1-in-1. So we had a choice. We had to build a new design, which means new names, new everything. And we need to, and we're working on this now. We're testing it. And everything's really gone well as far as testing, moving the AOV PN servers to the new cert, seeing how the client responds to that and timing it out. But you mentioned earlier, and I'm wondering if I misheard, you mentioned not changing CA. So I just want to make sure that process is as expected to transition to a new CA.
Yeah, great questions, Lisa. I appreciate it. So when I talked about not renaming the CA, so specifically I'm talking about doing a CA database migration. So the use case or the scenario would be you have an issuing CA running server 2012 R2, and you want to update that to something else, right? 2022 or any supported operating system. In that scenario, the way I migrate CAs is I basically back up the configuration, the CA database, and then I migrate that to a new server running a new operating system. But I always use the same server name. And the reason for that is it greatly simplifies the database migration. And it also avoids some of the unintended consequences of changing the name of the CA, because the name of the CA is embedded in a lot of things like CDP locations and so forth. And it can cause a lot of problems if you take the database and migrate the database and the configuration to a new server with a new name. Now, sometimes that's unavoidable, and you do have to do it, but you just have to be very careful with it. In this case where you're making a new hierarchy, you're literally bringing on a new root, new issuing CAs, that's fine. All those names are going to be totally different, and that's completely understandable. And to your point about migrating, So if you're familiar with direct access would complain mightily if you tried to change the CA. Things would break almost instantaneously. Always On VPN is much more forgiving in that aspect. Where you might run into problems is when you change the root CA. For example, if you're using IPsec and you have defined the root certificate name restriction, then you have to plan accordingly. And unfortunately, the VPN server supports only one root CA at a time, unfortunately. So we can't say we have two root CAs that we trust. We can't do that. It only trusts one at a time. So generally speaking, what we will do is in that scenario, we will stand up the new CA infrastructure and we will push out certificates to all of the endpoints. And then once all of my endpoints have the new certificate, new trusted root, they have been issued a new device authentication certificate or user authentication certificate, then we can make the change to the new CA. And as long as we've front loaded the endpoints with our new certificates, then it should go smoothly. So as long as that's done, you should be okay.
Okay. I think, and Martin, and stop me if I'm wrong here, but I think we were thinking that's what we're trying to make sure we get the order right here and try to impact people the least. So I think we were thinking app servers first, then pushing out to customers. Should we be looking at it from the opposite, pushing it out to the customers first, and then putting on the app server?
Talking about the Always On VPN workload specifically, I like to push them out to all of your devices and users first before I make any changes on the backside. Because if I make a change on an infrastructure server and all of a sudden it says I'm going to want a certificate from the new CA, then I know all of my endpoints have the correct certificate.
So, Martin, did I get that properly? Am I thinking about what you were thinking in the right order there?
Yeah, and so what we were thinking about doing was deploying the certificate to the endpoints using Intune configuration profiles. That way they didn't need to be connected to the network in case they didn't receive that new certificate in time. They just need to be connected to the internet and get that new computer cert.
Excellent idea. Intune's wonderful about that because there are times when you could break connectivity, and you don't want to have that dependency, that circular dependency, right? I need connectivity to the network to get a certificate, but then I need a certificate to get to the network, right? So Intune breaks that and allows you to push those certificates out anytime you're ready. Yeah. So.
Cool. Okay, that's a good step for me. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Very good. And by the way, anytime you're doing certificate work, I always suggest testing as thoroughly as possible because there's always unintended consequences, right? And there's always things that crop up that you just didn't consider or even didn't find in initial testing. So whenever I'm doing any sort of certificate services work, we try to proceed very cautiously and in small steps. So test thoroughly, even when you're done testing and you think you've got it, try to do pilot groups and go from there. But yeah, I think if you're using Intune, that's really going to be helpful too. Awesome. Any other questions? And by the way, if you don't want to chime up or you don't have a microphone, just drop that in the chat or probably chat or QA. It doesn't matter. I'm looking at both. So any questions that come up, go for it.
Richard, I'll ask a question.
Yes.
It's Doug here.
How's it going, Doug?
Good. Just curious if you have any customers testing on. I know you talked about our pain points of Windows 11. We're all Windows 11. Unfortunately, we haven't really had that issue. Although we've noticed it when assigning additional profiles or changing the profiles. I don't know if it's quite the same thing, but overall they've been stable. So we aren't using device tunnels, only user.
So just user. So one of the challenges you face when you're switching CA infrastructure for the user authentication is getting certificates deployed is easy enough, right? So we use Intune, or if you're using on-premises AD, it's just auto enrollment, and that's easy enough. The challenge is, of course, you need to then update the EAP configuration. I'm assuming you're using, protected EAP probably, but ultimately you have to say, hey, listen, I have a new CA and this is a new trusted CA. If you're doing certificate selection, you would have to update those settings as well. So again, this is a scenario in which you'll test with an individual test client. It doesn't even have to be an always on VPN connection, just to be a regular VPN connection. And then once you hammer out your EAP configuration, you will have to update all of your endpoints and front load them with the new EAP configuration, which includes the new CA, right? So in typically, if you're following best practice, you will configure the EAP settings to restrict your certificates to a specific CA, right? And that's done by the trusted root certification authority setting. And you can select more than one. And so now that you have a new root, you would have to, and this is assuming you're moving over to a brand new hierarchy. And by the way, this would apply if you were renewing your CA certificate, because for all intents and purposes, when you renew an existing CA, it is effectively a new CA because it gets a new certificate and a new thumbprint. So you have to, when you renew that certificate, you then have to push that information out to your endpoint. So you may have to go back and update the EAP configuration on your endpoints prior to making any other changes on premises.
Gotcha. So my question is actually about something like I think we're not facing that. I actually don't know.
Okay.
I know we built a whole new CA before, and we're using the short-lived Intunes, like the short-lived conditional access certificates.
Okay.
On them. So I think maybe we don't face that. But
yeah.
I'm curious. You had posted a blog about we're testing very small group of people the ability to select Ike and SSTP with Ike being the priority.
Okay.
Do you have other customers piloting that? What are they seeing? How that operates? I'm very nervous to put it in the field.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. Like it's nice that working at home, having the Ike speed, like seeing that it connects so fast.
Yeah.
But two things I've observed. There are situations, so we have people that travel where we need to offer a full tunnel to make sure they can get out full, like say to travel to certain overseas locales.
Yes.
I found with the two SSTP profiles, which is what our users have as standard now, they have like actually we give them three, like always on SSTP, and then like an SSTP full and a Ike full. And if they move to one of those full ones, it kind of moves nicely. But if I'm on Ike already and I try to connect to the other Ike, it seems to get totally unhappy. Like I lose DNS, kind of gets unhappy, and I have to actually do with admin on my system, it's fine. I do like a reset network adapter that kind of self-heals, but obviously a user can't do that. They're just left broken. And then I was at one public place and I found it seemed like it was trying Ike, but it couldn't connect. And then it just also didn't pick up SSTP. So then I was kind of stuck in a loop.
Interesting. So yeah, that's always interesting. And I don't know if the force tunneling has any bearing on that as well. So with Always On VPN specifically, I think you're alluding to some new settings that were exposed in XML.
Yes.
That allowed you to define your protocol list. So just for a bit of background for everybody else. So there are a couple of different VPN protocols that you have as an administrator that you select from. There are a handful, 4 or 5. There's really, practically speaking, only 2 that you would ever want to use, and that would be SSTP and Ike v2. So Ike v2 is UDP based. It's based on leverages IPsec, and SSTP uses HTTP for transport and TLS for security. So Ike v2, performs well. SSTP, it's not very firewall friendly. SSTP is very firewall friendly, right? So the advantage for operational stability is with SSTP, but you may have requirements to use Ike v2 for a number of reasons, interoperability or security or whatever. So when you select automatic for the native protocol type, it will try SSTP first. If you select Ike v2, then it's only Ike v2. And if you select SSTP, it's only SSTP. And by the way, up until recently, there was no way to define SSTP explicitly. You could only define automatic. And so if you were trying to tailor the connectivity such that it would try Ike v2 and fall back to SSTP reliably, that feature didn't come until recently. And what you're talking to, and what Doug's talking to here, is some XML settings that allow you to define the protocol list, and then you order the list in preference. And so you define your protocol list, and then you say, I want to do Ike v2, and then that's my preferred, and then SSTP and is the second one. Now, those work, and they work pretty well for me. I'm going to ask Philip to comment on this. Philip, this is the one. Was this the one that breaks some of the things in Windows? In other words, Ike v2 always reports whether or not you're doing SSTP or not, and then there was something else missing. A get VPN connection is broken.
Well, I know there
right,
was a
Philip?
bug, like you documented the bug, that it always shows as Ike even if it's on SSTP.
Yeah, is that still the case, Philip?
It is. If you open ncpa.cpl, or what is it, network connections, it always shows as Ike v2, although it is connected as SSTP. And yes, this is confusing. There's a bug for it, but to be fair, it hasn't been picked up. And the other one is, it's within the right team, but well, politics and so on. The other one is, if you do a get VPN connection, as soon as get VPN connection sees one with protocol list, it's just blank, which is more.
Yes, I remember that. That was in the blog,
even worse than that. Yeah. Same story. There's also a bug for it. It's within the right team, but it hasn't picked up yet.
So those issues are being addressed. So ultimately, Doug, I can tell you that it works. I've tried it. It's just that there's some negative side effects associated with it right now. So proceed cautiously. I think if you need it, you can leverage it. But if not, you may want to hold off on it.
Yeah, we're testing. Like I said, we just have it out with a couple of people in IT. I'm not based on my experience, but based on that, it would be hard for our service desk to troubleshoot anything. So I wouldn't put it out with those bugs out there. And then this one issue I just had recently where it was like switching between the tunnels is a weird one. I don't know why. I can bring up both I gotta have an always on and then bring up a full Ike tunnel. So I have two Ike tunnels, and then it doesn't know. I haven't dove into the routing table, like what it looks like there, but basically I lose DNS at that point.
So let me ask you this: Are you attempting to establish multiple VPN connections simultaneously?
Well, no, I don't want to. I want to usually like you down one and then you turn off like the always on and bring up the other one. But it seems like if you don't quite get that order of operations right, or it like tries to reestablish before because the Ike ones come up so fast, you have no time. It's like bam.
So and just to be clear, you have an always on VPN connection and then some regular non always on VPN connections, which are kind of
again
auxiliary.
Our actual production one that employees get is they get always on VPN SSTP, and then they get people that travel to certain places where we feel they would need full connectivity, a full tunnel option. We publish what we call a fast, which is an Ike v2, and a reliable, which is just SSTP full. Their dog is like turn off the always on and then turn on one of those.
And so when they turn off always on, then they actually go into the UI and just right click disconnect.
Correct. And then, but it seems like with this, the two auto discover ones, which is what I'm piloting, is like a full and like an always on and a full tunnel with the autos with the selection of Ike as priority and then SSTP. Like again, besides the UI and PowerShell bugs, it just doesn't seem happy. If I'm I can't bring down the one and bring up the other. And then there was this other issue where I was at a public network and it seemed like maybe IPsec Ike wasn't blocked, but it also kept trying and it wouldn't fail back to SSTP. So that was also weird.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Phil.
I just want to say that the failback isn't perfect at all. We assume quite a lot of things in order should we fail back or should we not. It's well, I guess it's far from perfect actually. So it does work in most scenarios, but I've seen scenarios where it doesn't work, like when there is some weird inspection or some filtering, some packets are filtered, some others are not. So then we're not recognizing it, and then we're in this state where we're connecting, and that might block other tunnels from connecting. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not perfect to switch over.
Okay.
And I would add that that's my experience as well, is that sometimes the failover and failback works reliably and other times it does not. It seems to work reliably more often, but this is not something that I've used heavily like when I'm traveling. So it seems to work reliably in my lab, but lab environments are often not representative of the real world. And so your mileage may vary there. I would say that you'll just have to kind of take it as it comes.
I think with Philip, what you just said, we're going to back off pushing that even further. We're going to just stick with what we have. I'll let someone else, ask one more question, I'll let someone else speak. So then that brings me to, are there any product plans that anyone is aware of to bring something that is UDP based to 443? like DTLS,
yeah.
quick over SSTP. I don't know what the options are. Like that's obviously the sweet spot. Works everywhere. Works everywhere, anywhere in the world. And
I think I know the
question.
I think I know the question to this, but Philip, I'll let you speak on an unofficial basis.
Is this being recorded?
It is being recorded.
No.
So sorry.
No, it's all right. Honest answer, not anytime soon. There have been plans, but it's probably no surprise that company direction is towards Azure. So
yeah,
that's the first priority. And let's say if there is time and an incentive, then yes. But as it currently stands, not anytime soon. That's probably the most diplomatic I can say it.
Very good. Yeah, and DTLS and Quick would be ideal, right? There's a lot of third-party solutions that use that, and it's much better, and you avoid that TCP and TCP tunneling TCP in TCP is problematic. So just from a structural perspective, right? So doing that in UDP would be fantastic. Quick would probably be one of the better choices, but DTLS would be fantastic. But yeah, unfortunately, this is like Philip alluded to. Microsoft is all about the cloud. Azure is the #1 priority and focus, and that's if we're going to see anything, that's probably where we're going to see any support for that first.
Which I totally we moved away. Like we replaced Cisco AnyConnect solution with this with Always On VPN, which. Though it was a big negative, actually, like the speed was noticeably different. But what saved us was we built a global deployment. So we put, which again, I know it says we're running them all in Azure. So Microsoft's getting plenty of money. We're running them all in Azure. They all run in Azure. We know we can't call support, but it's fine. Like
it works.
We have this community. And that's deployed globally so that we got the locations closer to the users. So we have locations on a couple of continents, and we use the load balancer to distribute that traffic, and that works quite well. And my rant would be the storage team put Quick into SMB, and I don't exactly know what the use case is for that. But why do they get to do that? Like, I don't know whose compliance people would say like, oh, you can put SMB shares on the internet. Like, the reality is we have to bury that stuff behind VPN. So why don't we get Quick on the VPN solution that Microsoft makes? Like, that would be my rebuttal to that, Philip. If you're in a product meeting, like the storage team got to do it when what we should have given customers is the VPN solution, and then they.
Good. Well, very good point.
Very often these decisions are made because we need it internally for something in Azure, and then it's suddenly quick to implement, right? Because we need it, and then it's being made available as a product. But and for your specific example, Doug, this might or might not have been the case in this scenario.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
You might need to you might need to blur something out of the recording, Rich. Sorry.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I get in trouble.
Good times.
Maybe because, like you mentioned, the just a bit of caution probably for everyone, because I had a long-running support case I was working on with the connect automatically checkbox. Right. It does have some implications which I didn't realize too. It's a very long chain of events, but it can happen. So assume you uncheck the checkbox, or the user does that, or you do a RAS style /disconnect, which has the same effect if you run it from the user context. It actually unchecks this checkbox. So this can have what it technically does. It removes some registry keys, the auto connect registry keys. That's all good. When you click on connect, automatically they will be set again. So the problem is if they get removed because it's unchecked, user or RAS style. RAS main actually reads that, so the service reads that, and it stores it in a global variable, or it doesn't store it in a global variable, so they're empty. So if you have now a scenario where you have a device in the user tunnel, and you uncheck this box, so the rec key is empty, the global variable is empty, and device tunnel is on the machine, use tunnel is on the machine, and then there is a NCSI event, Network Connectivity Status Indicator, the intranet detection, which says, oh, I can't reach the active probe, or something changed, or some network event. Then we might run through a code path, which is actually checking, oh, it's a device tunnel. Is it actually on the right physical interface, wired or wireless? And most likely, because this global variable is empty, because this connect automatically is unchecked, we can't recognize that the user tunnel is a user tunnel or it's a tunnel. But we just see it as an interface.
Huh.
And typically, the user tunnel has a very low metric. So we say, oh, cool, there's a perfect perfect interface where we can roam the device tunnel to. Guess what? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I had a customer. It was going on for a year. It took us a year to figure that out. What the hell is going on? And apparently it's that because they have some scripts, some remediation scripts, and the remediation script do a RAR-style disconnect in the user tunnel. So they inadvertently uncheck the connect box, and that in turn, this whole chain of events caused then the device tunnel to start connecting and disconnecting. Sorry, there was a bit of a long one, and I'm not sure you could follow. But it might be worth an article, Rich.
Yeah, that's definitely. And by the way, to your point, real quick here, if you go to my GitHub, I wrote a script for a customer. I think it's in here. Yes, clear auto-triggered disabled profile. This was a big enough problem for a customer of mine that we had to write this script. This script basically looks for the VPN profile. And actually, I think I don't think I put this as a proactive remediation for Intune. But bottom line is there are when you clear that list, when you clear the checkbox, it's very easy to put the checkbox back. But the problem is there's a bunch of supporting information that's gone from the registry that you have to rebuild, and that's what Philip was alluding to. So there's a basically what this does is this script will basically go through and add that information because we have to populate the user SID, we have to populate in binary the GUID for the VPN profile. So anytime you are unchecking that box, when you check it, it does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And so this script allows you to programmatically check the box, but also put the supporting information back in that will allow the connection to connect automatically once again. So that's just a heads up on that. So that might be helpful for you in the future.
That's a good script. Maybe worth to mention is that you need to restart RASMain after doing this.
And my script does that.
Yeah, exactly. So be aware of that.
So yeah, as a matter of fact, I think that was one of the things you and I were talking about. I was doing all this and it wasn't working, but at the very end, we killed the RASMain service and then restarted. So and 99 times out of 100, that will restart. That will actually trigger the connection reevaluation and it will connect automatically. I've a couple of cases where it didn't seem to work and you ended up having to reboot, but more often than not, that solves the problem.
Yeah, and the reason
sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say that the reason for that is because we don't have a change notifier in the registry key. So if you just change registry settings, it won't be read in, right? You need to sort of kick the RASMain service, unfortunately.
Yep.
We don't have that problem, but I might just look at that one and put it in, have our team put it in Intune as one that can be run on demand if they're ever troubleshooting a user.
Yep.
Just kick it off and
for the support guys, maybe.
Yeah, for the support guys, just like, okay, let's make sure it's kind of back to the way it should be.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, unchecking the box, like I said, does more. There's a lot more to it. Originally, I thought it was just a registry setting, and I remember finding that registry setting and going, oh, great, I can set this registry key, and you'd set it, and it would check the box, but it still wouldn't connect. And so after doing a little more digging, we found out it was just more involved than that. So good enough. Well, hopefully that helps, Doug.
Thank you, both of you.
Gave you some things to think about. I want to get to a couple of questions in the chat here. Sri, you had mentioned, is the best practice to switch to certificate-based authentication for the user tunnel? Security best practices would dictate using certificate-based authentication for user tunnels because certificates are they're an excellent phishing-resistant credential. The problem with using usernames and passwords is that they're easily compromised or stolen. MFA helps that, but then MFA tends to be an invasive thing, right? And it really, the problem with MFA and Always On VPN is that it makes the Always On VPN solution less seamless and transparent, because when you connect, then you have to do something additionally to establish the connection fully. The problem that I have with using MFA with Always On VPN is that you are introducing training your users in risky behavior. Let me describe that. Specifically, if you enable MFA with Always On VPN, you are asking the user to accept an authentication prompt for an action which they did not expressly take. So the Always On VPN connection happens transparently. The user doesn't do anything, and then all of a sudden their phone buzzes and it says, do you want to accept this connection, right? Or do you want to accept this authentication? And so if you say yes, there's no indication on there, by the way, that it says it's Always On VPN. It just says it's just, do you want to connect? And so you'll press the button, and that may or may not have been your Always On VPN connection. And again, if you are on an Always On VPN connection that it maybe didn't establish initially, maybe there was no internet connectivity when the user first logged on, maybe their access point was available or unavailable, or they hadn't accepted terms of service on a portal. Any number of things could delay that connection until a later point, which they could be just working away, and all of a sudden their phone buzzes and they're being prompted to accept an MFA. And so that's a real challenge. So using certificates is great because it is a phishing resistant credential, and I'll qualify that by saying when deployed correctly, you should always deploy authentication, user or device authentication certificates to a TPM exclusively. Once they're deployed to the TPM, then those device-based certificates or device-backed, hardware-backed certificates are a strong phishing-resistant credential that you can use. So strongly encourage anybody doing Always On VPN or any sort of remote access to use certificate-based authentication. So the next question is, if so, what are the steps to implement? That's a good question. That would involve obviously setting up a PKI, right? So deploying a root and issuing CA server, deploying your certificates to your users and devices. That's a whole thing, right? So there's plenty of training available online for that. Would recommend you visit pkisolutions.com for that. I don't do any certificate CA training myself. That's just quite involved, and I leave that to Mark and his team at PKI Solutions. They have some great training in person and online. So if you're looking to learn how to set up a PKI, definitely want to take a look at their offerings there. Next question, does your Pluralsight course cover setting up a lab test environment? Absolutely. I don't know that it's necessarily a lab test environment. The Pluralsight course covers everything Always On VPN, so it's not going to tell you how to set up a domain controller, DNS server. It's not going to tell you how to set up file servers or build your certificate servers. The assumption is that the infrastructure is there because the course focuses on Always On VPN on the workload. So hopefully that helps for you. Follow-on question from Doug. Can you tie the certificate issuance to device compliance and have them short-lived? 1 hour.
No, that was a comment, not a question.
That's a comment. Sorry. Yes. So absolutely. So there are a variety of things that you can do with certificate issuance to tie them to specific policies. Unfortunately, if you're doing certificates with Intune, you cannot use attestation, but if you're delivering certificates on premises via Active Directory and group policy auto enrollment, then you absolutely can define issuance policies and then basically you can use something called attestation. Essentially, we can basically say, hey, listen, this certificate must be enrolled for by a TPM. But we are ultimately relying on the user to do the right thing and create the key pair and submit the request, the signing request, and using the TPM. But an attacker could spoof the TPM. This is probably more of an academic exercise. I don't know if that's an active thing in the wild, but it could be. The way you can do this is with attestation. Active Directory Certificate Services supports something called key attestation, where you can make the client prove that they have created the key pair on a TPM. And with that, you can assign different assurance policies, and then you can make access decisions based on those assurance policies. So you're absolutely right, Doug. You can do that, and that's fantastic. But unfortunately, if you're using Intune, and by the way, to answer your, or to further comment on that, you have the ability as the administrator when you're issuing certificates to define the lifetime. So you could say they're short-lived certificates. I think the real challenge is doing them as short as 1 hour with on-premises would be challenging. But certainly with, if you're using Azure Conditional Access, that's probably the best way to go for this workload, is to use Azure Conditional Access, because then we can deliver the certificate outside of the tunnel and then make our policy decisions that way. And basically let them build that.
That's how ours is. Like,
yep.
we use that side. So there's no dependency on the tunnel to get any of the certificate issuance, and they're cycling all the time.
Yes. So the Azure CA certificate is good for 1 hour. So it has no revocation information in it, because they're revoking a certificate that only has a 1 hour lifetime is pointless. That can cause problems. You do have to do some configuration. As a matter of fact, I've had a number of requests, and I should put this on the list. I should try to do this before the end of the year, is to do a demonstration video of setting up Azure Conditional Access with Always On VPN, because there's a variety of things you have to do. Publishing the certificate, creating the certificate in Azure, publishing the certificate, configuring NPS server to support those things. Anyway, I'll put it on my list. I'll try to get it done this year. Promise. Hopefully things mellow out towards the end of the year. I've just been quite busy lately. Outstanding. So, any other questions at all? Anybody else have anything they want to chat about?
Yeah, I have some questions as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
We're using AOV PN Ike v2 device tunnels.
Okay.
And we are encountering issues as we switch from triple DES to AES, as you recommended in your blog.
Okay.
As soon as there is load on the RAS server, the connected clients encounter typing lag in RDP sessions, especially when doing file transfer from other clients.
Okay.
There are even repeatedly timeouts in ping. With triple DES, there were no issues whatsoever. Did you come across some issues like that in this regard?
Interesting. So this worked fine when your cryptography settings were the defaults. So 3DES, SHA-1, and then I think the default is 1024 bits, so 1K RSA keys. So you switched that from the defaults to what? AES 128, I'm assuming?
Right.
Okay, great. And now you're having problems. Now, if you switch back to 3DES, does it work fine?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. So I am unaware of anything that would cause those issues related specifically to cryptography. Philip, I'll throw this over the fence to you. Have you encountered anything that would make AES work unreliably? I mean, the AES is such a stable protocol. I can't imagine it being problematic. Any thoughts on that, Philip? Have you seen anything like that?
Not with AES 128. With 256, I had a scenario, very specific scenario. And I think you're also not a fan of AES 256 in this scenario for reasons.
Yeah.
No, not with AES 128. That's pretty interesting. I use it with a lot of customers.
Huh.
What's the scenario, Jan? Where you're copying from a client to a VPN client, or server to a server, or?
Right. That's some other clients also using the AOV PN on the same RAS server. And as soon as the other OVPN client starts maybe a copy job from maybe a file share or wherever, the other clients getting stuck, or getting type lag in RDP sessions, and this kind of stuff.
So by doing a copy operation from one VPN client, you affect other VPN clients.
It affects other clients.
Right.
Fascinating.
Okay.
That is interesting. But it doesn't do that with 3DES.
That's right.
That's interesting.
Sounds like worthwhile investigating. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the first questions I would ask you on is, tell me about the VPN server. I'm assuming this is a virtual machine running on what?
Yeah, it's running on vSphere or VMware.
So it's running on VMware. Okay. Are you using the VMXNet adapters on the server?
That's right.
Okay, so VMXNet on the servers. Okay, good. There are known issues, or I recall running into lots of problems back in the day with the E1000 legacy adapters. We try to avoid those as much as possible. So if you're running VMXNet, that's good. Latest version of the what is it? The agent, the tools, VMware tools.
VMware tools, yeah.
Yeah, VMware tools are up to date.
Okay,
Are you using NSX in VMware tools? The network something filter driver that's known to cause any sort of imaginable problems.
I'm not quite sure on this.
It's part of the VMware tools install. Depending on the version, it's either checked or unchecked by default. I've seen countless issues, not only VPN service, all sorts of service. That might be worthwhile, but it would be odd to surface like that.
Would you please repeat this setting again for me, please?
Let me look it up. It's called NSX something VMware tools. NSX. What is it called? NSX network introspection driver. Let's see.
So I assumed that AES would perform better since the server as well as the clients are hardware accelerated in this regard. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I don't know.
And again, quite unusual, right? So AES has obviously been around for some time. I can't imagine anybody having a problem with it. So, but yeah.
I put something in chat, sir.
Ah, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
That was what I'm talking about.
Very good.
So
good to know.
Is it true that the cipher transform constants from AES 128 is by default in CBC mode? Could it be a possible solution to switch it to, for example, GCM mode?
So definitely recommend switching to GCM if you're not using that today, because it's obviously going to provide better security and performance. So yeah, the default settings are obviously very poor. And in the early days, I used to recommend just using straight AES 128. And the reason for that was interoperability. Many customers are still running very old, VPN servers, 2020, or 20 server 2012 R2 and things like that. And so there were I just kind of recommended that as the default. Today, I definitely recommend using AES 128 with GCM. And let me very quickly here, I'll grab this is an example. If you look on your screen here, these are the settings that I recommend today, and definitely recommend using GCM for both authentication and cipher transforms. And also, by the way, for the encryption method, please note the syntax is ever so slightly different here. So back in the day when I first started playing with these, first got introduced to Always On VPN, this probably cost me half a day to figure out why I couldn't get this to work, because this is GCM AES 128, no space, same here. But this, the encryption method, somehow the syntax is a little different. AES _ GCM _ 128. No idea why it's that way, but it is. So yeah, if you want to take a look at that, so that's in the GitHub. If you want a reference for that, those are the settings that I recommend, and of course they need to be set on the client as well. So it would be interesting, but it would be really interesting, Jan, to know if you switched to GCM, if that solved the problem or if that made things better. I'd be really curious to know. So. If you do some testing on this, please reach out to me and let me know, and I'll share that information with Philip. I'd love to know if that solves the problem.
Okay, I do. Maybe it's worth mentioning that we are using multiple RAS servers in the clustered configuration, like we're using a load balancer.
Okay.
I don't know if this maybe is doing something differently, or maybe there's something else that's causing this problem. But
yeah, I would think the load balancer is just forwarding packets at that point, right? They're not doing any sort of traffic inspection or any sort of data manipulation. So I don't expect that's the issue. To rule out the load balancer, it might be helpful to, if possible, configure a client to connect directly to the VPN server itself, because it could also be any sort of any intermediary device, right? So if you have any sort of traffic inspection that's maybe happening, in line anywhere in the path, could be problematic. I mean, there's any number of things that could happen. I would think for testing purposes, you would want to kind of distill this down to its kind of its most simplest configuration. If you can get the client to talk to one server and you still have the problem, you can kind of eliminate the load balancers and anything else that might be in line as well. But that would be good to know for sure.
Yeah. The client team within our organization states that they had massive issues with Windows 10 build 1809, and we're using Server 2019, also build 1809.
Okay.
Would you see a problem there here, maybe?
Not to my knowledge, no. I think no. I certainly can't conceive of anything that would be problematic there.
Okay.
Yeah, Server 2019 was quite reliable and stable. Server 2022 is similar. The advantage to Server 2022 is it supports TLS 1.3, so there's an advantage to using that for VPN if you're using SSTP. But for IKV2, there hasn't really been any changes since Server 2019, right? So 2019 introduced support for IKV2 fragmentation. I'm assuming you have enabled support for IKV2 fragmentation on the server as well?
Via the regedit key. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Very good.
Yes.
Good. So yeah, I think if you're doing those two things, that's a pretty standard configuration. So if it's still not behaving correctly, it would be really interesting to have you open a support case and get some eyes on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. And in the notes in the chat there, Philip also mentioned making sure that RSS is enabled on the VPN server, receive side scaling, and he gave you the PowerShell command to do that. So check that out, Jan.
Yeah. Jan, if you can't resolve this, please ping me.
Oh yeah, very good.
Can probably look into something.
Very good. Yeah, that'd be great.
So how can I get in contact with you?
I drop you my email address.
Okay.
Oh no, I can't send you a message.
No. Oh, is it because of the? Yeah. Jan, reach out to me directly, and I'll start an email thread with all of us because I'd like to be in on this too. I'd like to hear what you come up with. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So, rich@richardhicks.com. That's super easy, and then I'll reply and include Philip on that. So, Doug, Doug says that it was mentioned there can be issues with AES 256. What are those issues? I'm not aware of any specific issues with AES 256 causing problems, other than there's a performance penalty associated with using AES 256 simply because of the overhead, right? So I'm not aware of any systemic issues with using AES 256. Are you, Philip?
No, that's what I meant. The gain from 128 to 256 is probably, from my perspective, not big enough to to get this performance or the potential performance impact. And
you're absolutely right.
I had a very specific issue with a hardware server which had a problem with ACE 256 because it was so old, the CPU. So that had actually a negative impact. But yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I was gonna say, if you're running modern hardware and software, AES 256 should not be a problem. My personal preference to use AES 128 is just born out of the fact that that 128-bit encryption is well more than enough encryption than probably anybody needs today anyway. And so for example, brute forcing a 128-bit key is going to take like 1 billion years anyway. I forget what the numbers are, but they're astronomically ridiculous, right? No one's ever going to do this necessarily, or practically speaking. And yes, AES 256 is stronger, but if you're trying to mitigate a risk that is effectively zero by increasing the encryption to reduce a risk that is effectively zero, what are you really gaining? You're not really gaining any effective or practical security. So I always recommend just using AES 128 because we save the overhead, right? So there might be performance gains you may see performance gains if you have a really, really busy, heavily loaded VPN server. It's not like you're going to do a side-by-side comparison, AES 128 and 256, and go, wow, I got another 20 meg download speed, because I switched. You may not see that, but where it does come in handy is if you have heavily loaded servers, you might see some issues there. The other thing is, I recommend AES 128 almost exclusively. The only customers that I would suggest using AES 256, either for Ike v2, with IPsec and with TLS also, for SSTP, is customers who have nation-state adversaries. So if you are a defense, military defense contractor, international finance, perhaps pharma, where you have to worry about IP, your intellectual property, those types of things, where you might come under attack against highly motivated and highly well-financed adversaries like nation states, then perhaps you want that extra security of AES 256. But for most people, AES 128 is well more than sufficient.
And
all right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably EC, elliptic curve certificates.
And that's your
performance, right?
You're absolutely right, and that brings up an excellent point. Philip brings up an excellent point. I'm a huge fan of using EC. So EC, or elliptic curve, sometimes ECC, elliptic curve cryptography, is the replacement for RSA. So RSA has been around, since the 90s or something, early mid 90s. RSA was invented, and we are now up to a 2048-bit key, so 2K key size is the minimum recommendation for RSA, and RSA has worked well and served us well for quite some time. The replacement for RSA is something called ECC, or elliptic curve cryptography. The advantage to using certificates using elliptic curve keys is that the keys can provide more security, right? So basically more entropy or more resilience with a much smaller key size. So for example, an EC certificate with a 256-bit key provides the functional equivalent of a 3072-bit RSA key. So you get more security, but you get a much smaller key size. The smaller key sizes do make for faster key exchanges, because anytime we are establishing a connection, whether that's IPsec or TLS, we are exchanging data. And if we have 2048-bit keys and we can knock that down to 256-bit keys, it's just far less data that has to transfer on the wire. In the case of IPsec with Ike v2, the advantage is that you don't run into issues with fragmentation. So that can be a problem as well. Even if you enable fragmentation support, you can still run into challenges and issues with that. So using EC is fantastic. The blocker to EC today is really interoperability, right? So there's a lot of public websites that still use RSA because they don't know for sure if their clients are going to support EC. I would submit that most clients today should support them, but today, you might want to hold off. But for this workload, for Ike v2 and SSTP, you can use EC certificates because we know the clients are going to be Windows 10 or Windows 11. We know the server side is going to support it, so you can actually get some benefit of using elliptic curve. I recommend, and as a matter of fact, been using EC for TLS since the beginning, right? Since the early days of Always On VPN, and I think I have a blog post on that. So if you just look up EC or ECC on my website, I think you'll find something about that. But there are some compelling reasons to do that using to support Ike v2 as well. So yep. All right, next, who's up? Anybody else have a question? Anyone at all?
No question, but maybe addition.
Yeah.
I checked the net adapter, and it is enabled, so the RSS.
RSS is enabled?
Yeah. But I don't know what this is. Maybe you can explain it to me.
RSS is receive side scaling, and RSS or receive side scaling has to do with how packets how TCP and UDP connections are spread across CPU cores and specifically threads. Am I explaining that correct, Philip?
Yeah. So essentially, when a packet comes in, right, the CPU needs to process it, and without RSS, it would always hit CPU 0. And with RSS enabled, and as part of when you enable RSS, usually the OS is intelligent enough to see, oh, you have 4 CPUs or 8 or whatever, and it creates then a number of queues, 4 or 8 in this case, and associates one of them with one queue with a processor, and by that you can progress or process more incoming network packets. So this is probably beneficial for any server which receives a lot of data, which is probably every server. So
yeah, many years ago, so I'm going to say early 2000s, mid 2000s or so, I was working for a large banking provider here in the US, and was managing the internet proxy infrastructure. We had a content inspection engine that ran on a server that was very, very busy because we had multiple proxies pointing to it. And this filtering engine ran as a process, and we were having all sorts of problems with scalability. And that was one of the first things that we had identified, is that I had a server. It was 4 CPU cores or something. I said, well, we just need to build a new server. So we got another one, 16 processors, put it into production. No change in performance. It was like, why? So we open up the performance monitor, and CPU core 0 is pegged at 100%, and the rest of the cores, it was like 16 more cores or 15 more cores, all just floating around 0%. Had to go back to the software vendor and say, hey, can you help us out here? They ended up having to do some work to be able to support RSS somehow in their product. And then enable it on the server, then boom, it was good. So yeah, we definitely want to make sure RSS is supported. So glad to hear that. That is supported, you said, Jan, right? Or enabled, I should say. Okay, great. That's good to know. Good to know.
Jan, we use the number of RSS queues and number of RSS processors. They should match the number of cores you have on the machine.
Yeah, it's 2 cores.
2 cores. So you should, if it's 2019 on you should see it set automatically to two CPUs and 2 queues.
And by the way, Jan, how many concurrent connections do you see on your server?
Because 2 is not too much CPUs.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Concurrent users are maybe 50 or 60.
Okay.
Yeah. So
should be right.
You may want to consider bumping that up anyway. My recommendation for minimum is 4 CPU cores. I don't know that you would necessarily have huge performance issues at 2 cores with 50 users, but it might be worthwhile bumping that up just to see if that provides any relief as well.
I mean, the CPU usage is kind of chilling. It's 10% or so.
Yeah.
And the CPU is passed through, so all the instruction sets and all this is passed through to the virtual machine.
Okay.
So
well, sorry, go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, like I said, I think that should be sufficient, honestly, for 50 users. Concurrent, that should be well enough. But it was just more of those things where I just kind of liked, it's my comfort level to like to see at least 4 CPU cores. So,
and maybe something like forced tunnel versus split tunnel is also relevant, right? Because with forced tunnel, there's much more traffic
and many more connections. Yeah.
And more connections.
Yeah. And not only that, just while we're on this topic, generally speaking, even if you're seeing low CPU utilization, you can see performance benefits simply because for individual users, if they are heavy users or if you're using forced tunneling, they can still benefit from those additional cores, even though you're not necessarily seeing resource utilization issues.
Okay. So there's also one thing related to the VMX Net3 adapter. There's a known issue that the number or the metric, you can look it up with get net adapter statistics. There's a value it is called received discarded packets, and this value should be 0, and at some point it is increasing. And I discovered that the value bump up to maybe 3,000 or so.
Oh, wow.
I don't think that is very much because there are billions of packets going through, and when there
Right.
are 3,000 packets going to be discarded, it's nothing.
That's pretty low,
But,
right?
yeah, the workaround states that you can adjust the driver parameters in the device manager. This is the RX buffers and smaller X buffers, I think. And I also tried that, and yeah, it worked. So it's 0 now, but it is no solution for my problem.
Got it. Interesting.
And I would be, from my personal experience, I would be rather careful with these parameters. I've seen negative effects with them as well. But if you're following some guidance from VMware and they're saying it's a good thing to do it, then it's probably okay. But I wouldn't play around with them because they might have some effects and you don't see them right away, or you only see them in certain scenarios. So yeah, you would be rather careful with them.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, there is unfortunately a lot of, like, I would say bogus, but kind of scary information on the internet. Hey, I tried this once and it helped me, and then you see people just blanket starting to do that for everything, and then you don't realize what the unintended consequences are. So yeah, gotta use caution.
Your favorite topic, disabling IPv6.
There you go. That's perfect. Yeah, I disabled IPv6 and it fixed my problem. And so just turn it off.
Like, oh God, yeah.
Yeah, don't get me started on IPv6.
No, let's not get started.
You know, what's funny is that RAS, if you try to disable IPv6, won't even start. So, and people will say, well, I'm not using IPv6. Well, sorry, there's dependencies in the operating system on it. So
I mean, I can paste the link from the VMware article for this if you're interested.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
You can look it up by yourself.
Yeah, very good.
As I said, this doesn't affect anything.
Interesting. Yeah, good to know. All right then. Any other questions at all? Anybody else? Good enough. Well, what I would say is that I think we got everybody's questions answered. I don't see anybody else. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can just put your question in the chat. Otherwise, we might just call it a day here. I might get to my lunch early today.
I might just have a quick question for the whole audience.
Oh yes.
I don't want to open a can of worms. Have you seen any sort of performance issues reported by specific scenarios, users?
Performance issues.
Ike versus STP, or just some in general some performance issues, because I've seen lately a few customers reaching out to us with completely different scenarios, and they all had different causes. Just
interesting.
Maybe just a quick question. Anyone seen any specific performance issues?
Personally, I am not aware of any of my customers reporting performance issues over and above the usual stuff, right? So a lot of times I get customers who will push back and indicate performance problems, but it's no different with any other VPN, right? So they're not getting any better performance than they were with Cisco or with, anything else, right? So it's sometimes there are just limitations to what you can get through a VPN, right? So sometimes, the protocol and encryption overhead that's associated with these, with any VPN solution can be challenging. But I'm not aware of any specific. Anybody else on the call? I would think if it was a huge thing, I'd probably be hearing about it, Philip, because I get a lot of people reach out to me via email and through the website. And by the way, a lot of times when I come to you, it's because I've heard it from several people, or like my customer, and then several people. It's like, is this,
maybe
was this related to an update, right? I'm seeing this weird thing happen now from 3 or 4 or 5 people. That's unusual, right? So that's all I usually hit you up to see, because I figure if I'm seeing it, you are probably seeing it at an even greater scale than I am. So
yeah, and we're actually working on 2 or 3 scenarios where we're trying to fix some performance-related things. It's mostly on the client, also SSTP in specific
Windows 11.
Technically any
specific. Oh, okay, got it. So not Windows 11 specific.
Not specific, but most fixes probably only go to Windows 11 at that when they're ready at that stage, to be fair. One is specifically for wireless, Ike and wireless. There's a scheduling problem, or a scheduling problem can occur.
Got it.
And then actually the file copy is always being sort of pushed between CPUs, and that just makes it slower.
Oh, interesting. I do remember there being a weird issue with Ike v2. I thought it was Windows 10. It didn't seem to be fixed into Windows 11, and I may have sent you the reference on that, where there was a weird thread scheduling thing, and things were getting sorted out of order. And
could be this one. It's not new.
It affected Ike v2, and it affected only very specific scenarios, right? You had to have a specific adapter with a specific driver version. So it wasn't even just like Lenovo. It was Lenovo with this adapter would have the problem, and then the rest of your Lenovo estate would be fine, or something like that. So
I had a performance issue with a specific laptop make Fujitsu.
Got it.
The specific wireless adapter, and it would really behave odd, but it eventually we don't have a solution yet, but it looks like this specific model, when, as you said, Rich, with this specific NIC, and only then it happens. And it's not too much you can do. Unfortunately, this customer has like 6,000 of these machines. Not great.
And updating firmware and latest device drivers didn't help.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the newer model, or the VNext model, doesn't show this anymore because they use a different NIC. So
different NIC, right? Different manufacturer or different model?
A different model, just different model.
By the way, anytime anybody complains about performance issues or any weird things like that, for me, I always recommend firmware update on the adapters and make sure latest device drivers, just to eliminate any of those challenges, because I've seen oftentimes those get overlooked by enterprise, right? You know, they enterprise sometimes really slow to update firmware. Software maybe a little more more quickly, but even then sometimes device drivers lag. Firmware certainly lags. So yeah, that can be a real problem too.
Chipset too. I think it makes a difference.
Yep. And then don't even get me started about TPM firmware updates.
Oh god. And there's so many TPM versions and sub versions, and some can do this and some can't. And
you're talking about a pretty critical component, right? Because if you bork that.
In sub, you can update. You can even update from 1.2 to 2.0, right? Through some big firmware update, but other ones you can't. And it's a bit challenging.
Yeah, always dicey. And then again, like I said, if it goes sideways and you lose all those certificates,
good either.
Yep, awesome. All right, I think we're going to wrap things up. I think that brings us to the end of our session today. Once again, thank you everybody for joining me. Thank you, Philip, for participating. I always appreciate it, and always helpful insight as well. I think that we will probably trying to think of when we might do this again. My goal was, as at the outset of the year, to do it quarterly. Probably not going to do another one this year, because the next time we do this probably be end of the year anyway, and it's going to be holiday time, and nobody's going to want to jump on a call, and then we're just going to want to celebrate the holidays. So we'll probably arrange another one of these calls in the first part of the year. Maybe we'll just talk about what the new year looks like and go from there. But one last bit of information here. I just put on the screen some resources for you. I will post the recording to today's session on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Richard M. Hicks. I was late to YouTube and didn't just get my name. I had to put my middle initial in there. So, and then again, as I'd made reference to on the session today, there's lots of capability. There are lots of tools and things at my GitHub, github.com/Richard Hicks. I do have lots of always on VPN stuff there. There's an entire repository for endpoint manager, actually now Intune, proactive remediations. Those written lots of those for my customers and people who've reached out to me on the internet who needed to do something. So those are all available to you there. But thank you again, everybody, for joining me today. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your year. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. But we'll call it a day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Take care. Bye.